So, well, that concludes the formal part of this evening's proceedings. And we'll return to what we are really here for. What our most interesting thing is a live presentation by Elizabeth Ann Macgregor, whom many of you will know. Almost everyone will know, surely you will know, that Elizabeth Ann Macgregor is the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, the MCA, and she is a champion of, brings a passion, I suppose, to bringing art, modern contemporary art, to bringing contemporary artists to people, to new audiences. She began her career as a curator of the Scottish Arts Council Travelling Gallery, which, as it says here, ignited her commitment to engaging new audiences with the work of living artists. It's all splendid. Fortunately, in 1999, she took up directorship of the Sydney's MCA, Museum of Contemporary Art. It is always, those of us who have been in Sydney for a long time will know that it's always been a difficult issue, about funding and all that sort of thing. She brought a breath of fresh air to it. She got a new funding model, and it was really splendid. And more recently, negotiated a $53 million redevelopment program, and completed in 2012. And last year, the museum attracted over 1 million visitors. I'm sorry that the numbers will not be the same this year. In 2011, she received an OBE and the Queen's Birthday Honours List, and she has received many awards and many prizes. It is truly a delight to welcome Liz Ann Macgregor to present a talk this evening on why art matters in times of crisis. So please, Liz Ann, over to you.
Well, good evening, everybody. It gives me very great pleasure to join you tonight. Thank you for your words, Ian. And I'm not going to do my days as a bus driver, which is my other party piece, but I'm going to focus on the importance of arts at this incredible moment that we're going through today. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging that I too am on Gadigal land. I'm at the Rocks, it's known as Talawalada, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge them as the custodians of the lands and waters upon which the MCA is situated. I'm going now to hopefully get my technology working and put the screen up and hopefully be able to show you some lovely art to start off. Now, as I was thinking about what to share with you tonight, I began to wonder what image would pop into your mind when I say the phrase contemporary art. I was interested that Ian slipped into the modern contemporary debate in his introductory remarks, and I'm not going to start to try and give you a definition. We define it, we talk about the work of living artists, but that doesn't mean to say that the artists in our collection, of course, as many of them are still alive. So when you think about contemporary art, I'm sure many of you will have been to MoMA in New York, or maybe the wonderful Tate Modern in London, and hopefully, of course, the MCA here at Circular Quay. And if you are a regular visitor, you'll be aware of the extraordinary range of work that artists produce today. Work in all kinds of media, painting, sculpture, installation, art paintings. Art that it can inspire us, it can challenge us, it can sometimes perplex us and annoy us. Art that fires our imagination and makes us look at the world differently. Art that relates to the issues of today. That is what I do here at the museum. A very good example of this is the current Sydney Biennale, which opened just before the crisis hit, called Nirin. It's now open again, and in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement that we've seen sweep across the world, the exhibition now seems very prescient, dealing as it does with artists of colour from around the world. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. Our very own Pedro Wanamira from the Tiwi Islands. However, I'm not going to focus on what we show in the galleries so much this evening. I want to talk about a different approach to making art, an approach which can have a very direct impact on people's lives that can be measured. When people visit an art gallery, we really don't know what impact these exhibitions have on them. Sometimes they tell us in no uncertain terms. However, there is a kind of art where there's a different kind of engagement with an audience, and that can have measurable impacts. And I'd like to start with an example for which I have no images because it isn't actually about a finished artwork. In the mid-1980s, when I was working in London, I met an Irish artist called Maurice O'Connell. At the time, he was artist in residence at the Barbican Art Centre in London. And after he'd been there a couple of months, the eminent broadcaster John Tusa, the chair of the board, invited Maurice to come and address the board about what he was doing as artist in residence. He got up with a whiteboard, this is way before Zoom time, and essentially he drew a map of the relationships of people to each other in the Barbican, according to things he found out by what I would call from the UK radiator meetings, or here they're probably water cooler meetings. This was information he gleaned. He didn't actually set out to get it. It was very informal. But as a result of listening to how people talked about their relationships with each other and how they went about their work, he created a flow chart which was highly illuminating and indeed exposed some of the communication and operational issues that the officers of the Barbican were experiencing. The chairman, in thanking Maurice, said he was surprised he had not thought of this as art, but he acknowledged that he could have paid management consultants thousands of pounds to examine the organisation and they might not have found out so much. Because artists ask the questions that don't occur to the rest of us, particularly management consultants, with apologies to those of you who may be with us tonight. This is indeed a kind of art. It's art as a process. In this case, the mapping out of a series of unseen relationships, bringing to light different ways of operating. It was art which told a story about the operations of the organisation. It didn't set out with an agenda, but it certainly ended up with an outcome, which was of great benefit to the organisation. This kind of work, which we now in our jargon call socially engaged practice, has developed significantly in the past 30 years. And many artists are now working away in this way. They're not sitting in their studios waiting to be discovered by curators. In partnership with colleagues in Western Sydney, the MCA has developed a programme called C3 West, which gives such artists the opportunity to address particular issues in a community context. Over the past 15 years, we've undertaken many projects, and I'd just like to share one with you tonight. We were invited to develop a project in collaboration with Campbellton Art Centre in Airds in southwestern Sydney. I'm sure many of you will know that Airds is a suburb with significant social problems, one of which was the polluting of the Upper Georges River by young people stealing cars, setting them on fire and dumping them. With some trepidation, we embarked on this, what I thought was an incredibly fraught project. We asked a Pacific Islander artist called Michael Tuffery to devise a project to raise local awareness of the links between river health and behaviours such as arson, dumping and littering. Tuffery worked with local groups to retrieve the burnt cars from the river and transform them in an outdoor sculpture workshop in the local public car park in the centre of town. He undertook a series of public events to explain what he was doing, and importantly, he worked with young people from the local school. In what I think is a masterstroke, the finished object, when you pop open the car bonnet, is a barbecue, fully working. Only an artist could have such an extraordinary inspiration to turn these things that were obviously very damaging into something so extraordinary. The project involved local groups and was brought to wider attention through a collaboration with Clean Up Australia. The sculpture is now sited in the school at the instigation of the principal, who said to me, "If this is contemporary art, bring it on. I've never seen these kids so engaged." The school now regularly brings groups to the MCA, and many of these young people have never seen the harbour before. This relationship is incredibly important to us, and we've continued it over the years. and it will become very critical in our response to closing the museum, which I will come back to. And best of all, there have been no cars dumped in the river since, and that was not an outcome I would definitely have predicted we could achieve. Michael Tuffrey talks openly about what art did for him as a young man growing up in his Pacific Islander community. Artists as role models for young people who have, for whatever reason, become disenfranchised can be highly effective. There are many, many examples of projects where artists gain the confidence, give people confidence, young people, to assert themselves in the world. Art has brought them to understand what they might contribute. And this kind of outcome is also measurable. A few years ago, one of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander curators, Keith Munro, undertook a residency in Gambalanya in the Northern Territory. He was there to run a series of workshops relating to an exhibition of bark paintings from Western Arnhem Land. But it was when he linked the school to the studio of Vernon Aki in Brisbane that things really took off. Vernon is a very successful Indigenous artist who's exhibited all over the world. Suffice to say, by the end of the week, the school had 100% attendance. I'm not exaggerating, which sadly was rare. Again, the principal made a real point of ringing us a couple of years later to say that a group of children who took part in Keith's work were the first to complete year 12, and he felt that this project had been the catalyst to their engagement with school. Keith and our Indigenous educators have also developed a programme called Jirali for young Indigenous people about to leave school to introduce them to the world of working in the arts. They work intensively here for a week and then they're taken around to other institutions. We're in the process of tracking the participants over the last 10 years to see what has happened to them. Now, everybody has heartwarming stories about the impact of the arts. And we always seek feedback, which is overwhelmingly positive, mostly. However, over the past few years, we've gone a stage further and have put in place research with key programs to develop social outcomes. We've developed a range of projects with our team of artist educators. These are artists who work part-time with us to engage with us with different groups, using our exhibitions or our collections as the starting point. Whether it's a young person from the country who doesn't have easy access to galleries, a family for whom English is a second language, an older person and their carer living with dementia, or a child under 5, our artist educators have devised a series of strategies designed to encourage creativity. And yes, we do start very early. Not everyone can be an artist, but we believe that everyone can be creative. And it is this emphasis again on the process rather than the finished outcome, the work of art, that is so important. Working with our university partners, we've been able to demonstrate the impact. This is the Art and Wonder programme for the under 5s, a collaboration with the Mia Mia Centre at Macquarie University, which has shown remarkable results for the development of these children through their contacts with contemporary artists. There is also at the other end of the spectrum, our Art and Dementia programme in collaboration with the Brain and Mind Institute at Sydney University, which has resulted in an online toolkit for carers, which is now being supported by the state government agency responsible for ageing. We've also embarked on a groundbreaking project with the newly opened Inner City High School, where a team of these artist educators are embedded, or rather they were before the close down, working alongside teachers to help them teach all subjects creatively. This is an important difference. We believe that these artists' creative strategies can help student engagement across the curriculum. By partnering with UTS, we hope to demonstrate the critical role that artists can play in helping prepare young people for the world of work in this fast-changing world. Last year, the Department of Education produced a book entitled The Future of Education in the Age of AI. It outlined the skills that young people will need as traditional jobs are undertaken by robots. These skills are creativity, critical thinking, resilience, empathy, collaboration, and agility, all taught by our artist educators. In some ways, the COVID crisis has given us the opportunity to promote more broadly the role of artists in society, and it's not the first time we've responded to a crisis. After Black Saturday in Victoria, we worked with the Department of Education to send a team of artists into affected areas. Not quite my bus, but it is a converted caravan in which there was a specially commissioned artwork. We brought the children from the schools and the areas that had been so devastated by the fires. And again, they worked with this wonderful team of artist educators to discuss their responses and how they could overcome the trauma of what they'd been through. We wanted to provide inspiration, to encourage them to tell their stories, and above all, to help them imagine a brighter future together. In February, we held a meeting with colleagues from the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre to discuss what we could do in response to the devastating bushfires that had ravaged our countryside and affected so many more young people. We were discussing what role our organisations could play in the light of this disaster. We talked a lot about the responsibility of the arts and of arts organisations to provide support for people in times of difficulty. We all agreed on one thing: the power of art to change lives. We know from what happened during the bushfires how many people who came here and talked about art and galleries as a refuge from what was happening, as well as an inspiration. Little did we know in February that this crisis would fast be superseded by another. And as I think you all know, the museum had to shut its doors on the 23rd of March as we all went into lockdown and began to deal with the new reality like this, working from home and endless Zoom calls. Challenging times indeed. We knew it was going to be very important to continue to connect with our audience, and especially those special groups who've been regular users of our National Centre for Creative Learning. These are some of the examples of the work that our artist educators have been undertaking in the Learning Centre with the different groups. We were very concerned at losing contact with these groups in the crisis, but we were fortunate because we had already begun to develop our online presence with a new website and a mobile app called mca.art, which could allow you to have a tour of the museum, a virtual tour of the museum, and interact with the artists. Lots of background material, lots of information, lots of ways for our audiences to engage with artists in a different way. We had lots of material. But in considering the question of what we should prioritize to put online initially, we actually turned to our artist educators and the social impact programs they've been leading to see how we could respond with them to this crisis. We know from what happened during the bushfires that artists could indeed contribute to community well-being, teaching those creative strategies which can help people stay mentally strong and adapt to new realities. And as we found in Victoria, artists can make a significant contribution to building and strengthening communities in difficult times. So we asked our artist educators to come up with strategies that people could do at home. We just launched 3 more of these last week on our website. Do check them out. Cindy and Giselle here have done an incredible job of turning themselves from being educators in a building to educators online. Now we know that mental health is going to be a very big issue for a lot of people coming out of this crisis. It's going to be a big issue for society. For several years, we've been running a program for young people, 14 to 18-year-olds, called Gen Next. Oh, sorry, this is another of our wonderful artist educators. This is one of the children's activities that we began around the Indigenous collections that we have here with one of our Indigenous educators called Marinda. The Generation Next program has been running now for 15 years, and we've seen literally thousands of young people go through it. It's a very simple program, very complex to organize. They come here on a Sunday night, and a program that began with a hope on my part that we would attract about 150 to 200 participants has quickly grown to more like 800. That's coming into the building. It's been very generously supported for many years by the Balnaves Foundation. And the answer to the secret to the success of this program is it is by young people for young people. We have a youth committee of 15, a very diverse committee of young people who come from right across Sydney, from east to west. So it brings young people together. And we see art here as a way for them to come together and discuss issues of concern. Sadly, over and over again, the issue of mental health comes up, a very big issue for the youth of today, even before the current situation developed. Last month, we held our first Gen Next online, a mammoth production which saw over 1,000 teenagers from across the country engaging with us over a 3-hour period. Again, the programme was put together by the Youth Committee, and as well as art and dance performances, spotlight tours of the museum, and here an Auslan storytelling session, there were sessions on how to cope with the lockdown and beyond. Now, I'm sure some of you might be asking yourselves, what does this have to do with art? Well, the answer is that we see art as the beginning, not the end of the process. It's a means to stimulate conversations of all kinds, often difficult conversations. Our research has shown us that the young people see the MCA as a safe space in which they can express themselves without fear of being judged. There is a very high percentage of LGBTQI young people who come to these programs. Art is a means of self-expression, or as my friend, the Scottish artist Douglas Gordon once put it, art is what makes conversation possible. During the crisis, we've been acutely aware of the need to keep in touch with all these groups I've been talking about. For example, our art and dementia group. Fortunately, we'd already developed the online toolkit, and we're able to promote that more widely thanks to some additional funding. This consists of a series of ideas and projects that carers can download for use with their loved ones. We also wanted to come up with some new ideas for them. So one of our artist educators came up with the idea of inviting them to create still lives from one colour. These are some of the beautiful images that the Art and Dementia group contributors have sent to us to show what they've done with the online toolkit. It's an extraordinary project and very moving. We're now working very closely with a number of foundations, and we're hoping to forge a partnership with Hammond Care to make this kind of material and the online toolkit in particular more widely available. We also talked more to artists about what they're doing in lockdown. A very interesting series has been developed called The Artist's Voice, where they're in conversation with our curatorial team. Many artists are very active in social media, and I certainly found their contributions inspiring and uplifting when I was feeling trapped in my house. Janet Lawrence, whose major exhibition at the MCA last year was one of the highlights of our calendar, was posting about the wonders of the natural world, as you would expect from an artist whose work is so much about the environment and the damage that we are doing to it, but nonetheless creating extraordinarily beautiful and moving artworks. There's an American artist called Susan Kleinberg who represented a work she made for the Venice Biennale. She'd videoed prominent people talking about fear, prominent people such as Gore Vidal and Condoleezza Rice, discussing what is courage and how they had faced their fears. It was made in 2001, but it seemed to me to be just as relevant to today's world. We have in the museum an extraordinary space called the Bella Room. This is a room where each year an artist is commissioned to make an artwork that is specifically for groups with special needs. But I should say that it always becomes much loved by everyone. It's in our National National Centre for Creative Learning, so it's not always accessible to the general public. But we undertake some extraordinary work with the different special groups with specific needs. We were concerned about losing touch with these groups during lockdown because we know how both the parents and the young people rely on us for inspiration and to keep them going. So we devised a way of reaching them online and have been able to turn the Bella Room, which has this extraordinary video inspired by the riding school for people with disabilities, into a video project and a Zoom talk that we could where we could communicate with a number of the young people who've taken part in these amazing Bella programs. These programs, by the way, for people with special needs, have been running since the museum began many, many years ago. In fact, they began with a workshop for one day, and now we run them all year round when we're open, thanks to the expansion of the museum that Ian referred to, and our fabulous National Centre for Creative Learning, which has given us so many opportunities to bring people through. Last year, over 98,000 people took part in these programs, which go, as I said, from all ages. These are some of the examples of our artist voice, artists from all kinds of backgrounds, artists talking to us from within Australia and also internationally, because we mustn't forget the importance of connection with artists across the world. Artists Sean and Claire up in the Blue Mountains talked very eloquently about what it was like having lived through the bushfires and then having to, I was going to say that dreadful pivot word, pivot into a new crisis and how they were coping and how they were making new work. We found people incredibly positive about these opportunities to engage with artists. And this is why whenever I talk about the Museum of Contemporary Art, I do talk about the importance of the artists of today, because we're able to hear from them themselves. It's fantastic to have a curatorial team and a team of educators that can talk about the work, but it is also wonderful as a museum to have the privilege of giving you access to their studios and their thinking. And this was one of the things we were able to amplify during the crisis, direct access right into artist studios. And I know from my colleagues in museums around the world that this was indeed one of the most positive aspects of what's happened in the crisis. This is our Art Bar event. This again is an extraordinary event that happens on the last Friday of every month, normally in the museum, where we hand over the wing to artists to do all kinds of things. It's art, but not as you might know it. And we again went online with this a couple of weeks ago and had extraordinary feedback to the presentations. Again, some serious, some fun for a Friday night, and some engaging, hopefully all engaging. This is one of the performances that we filmed before the evening and then screened as a video during the evening. A fabulous dance performance inspired by the amazing work in our collections by a local dance group. We also undertook a whole range of different inspirational things and had curators. This is a Zoom talk, in fact, by one of our curators who chose her favourite works and just a 10-minute chat about what those works meant to her. And again, it's something that our supporters absolutely loved, sitting at home thinking about how they missed the museum. So what did we learn? One of the most important things we learned came out of our deep commitment to our relationship with schools in Western Sydney. I was quite shocked early on in the crisis to learn from the principal of Maryland's East, John Goh, that 40% of his students did not have access to the internet. So there we were, busy putting all these wonderful programs online and hoping that we would be able to continue with our commitment to access, and then discovering that the very vehicle we were using was in fact not accessible to significant numbers of children. And so I rang the Daily Telegraph, I rang the editor, and I said, we would like to reach people across Australia who are interested in art and can't currently go to galleries. And I wondered whether there would be a place in this for the Daily Telegraph, which is the highest circulated newspaper in Western Sydney in particular. I'm pleased to say that Ben English reacted with enthusiasm. Turns out his wife is an art teacher. And he explained that they were about to launch a supplement called Hibernation, which is all about the things you can do in lockdown with your children. and that they would love to have the MCA contribute the creative art content, which is exactly what we did. What I hadn't expected, of course, not thinking about it too much beyond Western Sydney, is that the Daily Telegraph then puts the same content out with the Fraser Coast Daily and the Sun Herald, etc., etc. And so I suddenly discovered that this particular program, this particular initiative was going to reach over 3 million people. We're working with the Telegraph at the moment to get back some feedback on what it's been like. Again, the things that we put out there are very simple things inspired by artists, artworks created for the different age groups, and very simple to be able to do at home. So a really extraordinary initiative for us to have been able to take part in, and a totally unexpected one. Who would have thought that we would go back to the real print medium at a time when we're all working in digital media? So a big learning curve. I also connected with my mates. This is the Director to Director series around the world. And I'm including it in this talk because it was really wonderful to hear from Francis Morris, Director of the Tate, Mami Kataoka in Japan, Caroline Christopher Kardiev in Italy, and Klaus Biesenbach in California about their experiences, and in particular what they were working on with artists and how they were translating into this new world without museums. And my next talk, here's the plug, I will be talking with Suhanya Raphael in Hong Kong on the 27th of July. As the crisis has unfolded, we've seen an unprecedented creative energy unleashed online. I'm sure you all got sick of all those memes that were being sent around. However, it struck me that a lot of this actually shows people's own creativity, exactly the thing that I started out talking about in terms of how artist educators can stimulate creativity. Many of these memes were clever, questioning, provocative, humorous, perplexing, irritating, and funny, just like contemporary art. I think it demonstrates that everyone can be creative, and I think we need all of this creativity right now. I think in times of crisis, like bushfires and pandemics, art has the capacity to help people put a pause on reality and engage in a creative connection. As I said before, in relation to the bushfires, inspiring them to imagine a future beyond the crisis. At the end of the current crisis, we'll be in a very different world. Connection and relationships will be paramount to build and sustain the community. And I think art will be more important than ever to assist with the aftermath in terms of mental health, to encourage confidence, to give people hope, and to give them something to look forward to. I think we're going to need art and artists even more as we come out of the crisis. In fact, I'm going to argue that we need an arts-led recovery to encourage people back into society. I'm back in the office now. However, I am very aware that many of my team are still nervous about coming back out, and I guess the situation in Victoria is not going to help that anytime soon. So I do think we need ways to encourage and entice people back into what we hope will be a post-COVID world. There are so many extraordinary works of art for us to share online and in reality. And the plethora of things online, I believe, has led people to desire the real even more. The number of people who've said to me, we loved seeing Cornelia Parker online, but it was nothing like being in the gallery with our friends, talking about the work, looking at it, and thinking about the meaning by the artists. I think this is the kind of future that we want. We want artists to be central. We want artists to be continuing to make these extraordinary things and to inspire us and to encourage us. We want artists to be recognized as people whose process is as important as the production of magnificent works. We want artists like our fantastic artist educators to work with these amazing children who have so much potential, children who have often not been into galleries before. We run a program called MCA Connect in Western Sydney, which is specifically targeted at children from families who are refugees or have English as a second language. The children spend 4 days with our artist educator, and on the 5th day, we give their parents Opal cards so they can come here, thereby removing all barriers, and the children then take their parents around and talk about what the Museum of Contemporary Art means and what they've learned through it. It's now recognised by the Department of Education as a key programme in helping these young people become adjusted to what it's like to be Australian. Art can tell the story of Australia. We've so much to celebrate here, so many wonderful artists. Our unique Indigenous culture that is such a draw card for international tourists, but a huge local interest also in contemporary art. Last year, the MCA was acknowledged in the New York-based art newspaper, as Ian has said, as the highest attended art museum in the world with over 1 million visitors. We're not going to hit that this year, of course, but I do think that we should be talking more and more about how this arts-led recovery could tap into this extraordinary level of interest that we're seeing and encourage domestic tourism at least. I know so many people in different cities around the world that really want to travel and see art again. And goodness me, we could do with a boost to the economy. I think that we've done so well in keeping the COVID crisis under control, notwithstanding what's happening now. And I would argue that I think Australia is actually well placed again to be a world leader in having the arts and artists at the centre of an economic and a social recovery, because artists matter now more than ever. I've been involved recently in a fantastic series of conversations with various people within levels of government about what this could look like. I really believe, despite all the tragedy that's happening, all the terrible things that are happening around the world in both health terms and social terms, we can make the argument for why the arts matter, why we should invest in the arts, why we must invest in the arts, and why we should allow artists a voice to tell the stories in their way to engage with everybody. I'm hoping I'm inspiring you here. And we are now open, which we're thrilled about. So thank you. I hope to see you all here. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and indulging in a bit of dialogue now. So thank you.
Susan Pond here. Thank you very much for that presentation, inspiring in itself. I'm not giving the formal thank you, but would like to put the questions that have come in to you. The first one, you mentioned the conversations with government. Like in the health sphere, there are many rapid policy shifts, such as telehealth being just one example, being brought in and deployed very rapidly, meaning a very almost a seismic shift in policies. So what have you seen during the crisis in terms of seismic shifts of policy for the arts sector? And what would you like to see specifically, or more specifically, post-COVID?
Well, I think I would like to see a seismic shift, which is the recognition of the role that the arts should be playing. It should be more central. It should not be add-on. It should be actually at the heart of what we're doing to get through and help people beyond the crisis. So I would like government to move a bit faster on that one, and recognise. I've been talking a lot recently. Of course, money is essential, and I don't want to go on about it, but a lot of us are really. It's very troubling what's happening. But it's also about that recognition. It's about saying that the arts do matter, that actually things will not get better unless we really engage with the arts. And that's why I'm very heartened by the conversations I'm having with government. It may not result in lots of cheques being written. I think one of the things I glossed over a little bit, but the fact that we have got some money for the Art and Dementia programme now from the Department of Community and Justice, not the Department of Arts. And that's at state level, obviously. And I think that's a really important shift. And they were incredibly supportive. They looked at a whole range of projects around dementia, and they felt the project we've been running here, the way we've been running it, was the one that they wanted to back. And I think that when you start to see different departments recognising what the arts can do, then you begin to have some policy shifts. I think we're on the verge of one, hopefully with health as well. The WHO report that came out on the arts and health and mental health last year had some really amazing statistics and indicators. And so I'm, obviously pushing that, and the education agenda. So seeing arts cross-departmental is what I would like to see in a sense within government.
Okay. And a question from Judith Wheeldon. How can members of the public help you bring about that seismic shift?
That's a very good question. If you live in a marginal constituency, write to your MP, write to your, seriously, politics is a game of numbers, and it's a game of polling, and it's a game of getting elected. And we all know that the reality of the way elections work is that the polls tell them what they think the public thinks, that's very badly put. But my problem with all that is that they ask the wrong questions, but that's another issue. Yes, I think speak up for the arts, that's it really. And I think that we need to try and shift the conversation. I hesitate to say whinging, but the arts do have a bit of a reputation for whinging. I've been particularly vocal in my support of the JobKeeper scheme. I know it's massively flawed. I know that lots of casuals weren't supported through it, but quite frankly, without it, I would have been cutting 30% of the staff here. So I think we should credit government when they do things well and hold them to account when they don't. So I think being vocal and speaking up in a positive way, when we were campaigning to get the government money for the MCA, we were very much aware that we had to get different people to speak to government for us. They weren't going to listen to us. We've been treated, we're a bunch of, elites, blah, blah, blah. And so getting other people who might be unexpected to speak up for the arts is really important. John Go, as I mentioned, the principal of Merlin's East, is a fantastic advocate for us. I mean, just amazing, because he sees the impact of what we do on the children in the school, and he then talks about it so well. He's been involved in a number of things for us. So it's very heartening to have all kinds of people speaking up.
Okay, good. And a question from Len Fisher, who I believe is in the UK. So this is an international audience.
Oh, nice.
The Royal Society brings science and the arts together as a whole. What role do you see for science in your reimagined arts sector and museum?
I think that's a really exciting possibility it's been happening for quite a long time, but I think it can happen even more now to bring arts and sciences together. It's not one or the other. It has to be together. And, Janet Lawrence, for example, I've put her in touch with a couple of scientists. She's done talks. They love hearing what scientists love hearing from artists, and artists love hearing from scientists. So I think the answer to solve a lot of problems is actually collaboration between sectors and between individuals. So I'm certainly not anti the sciences. I just want to see the arts there alongside them.
Good. A bit of a curly question from Virginia. I think it's Virginia Judge. Has the MCA or any other museums of which you're aware or galleries got a relationship with the correctional system?
That's a very good question, Virginia. Thank you. Yes, there have been a number of initiatives. The MCA has not done any work in that sector ourselves, but a number of my international colleagues have. In fact, there's a very big program in California around art in prisons, and it has been shown to be effective in terms of engaging recidivism. So there's a very famous example in Scotland as well, a famous Glaswegian gangland leader called Jimmy Boyle, who was in an amazingly experimental program in Barlinnie, which is a pretty tough place. And he came out and became a sculptor and quite famous. And it's an extraordinary example of someone's life being completely changed around. So my answer to you is sadly not at the moment for the MCA, but yes, definitely in other places and with extraordinary impacts.
Okay, thanks. A question about the mental health of the artists during the pandemic. You mentioned the normal visitors to galleries, but what about the artists themselves?
Very big issue. I think artists, I mean, the two sides to it. Some artists are used to being in isolation. It is what they do. You know, they're in their studios doing things. So there's different kinds of artists. So I've been talking to a lot of them, and some of them have relished it. It's given them thinking time. It's taken them the pressure off them to be exhibiting or pushing their work or wherever. They've actually had time to reflect. For others, the anxiety has increased for them. You know, artists can be fragile, as we all can be. And so we're certainly talking with our artist educators. At the beginning of the crisis, we couldn't really push them. We had to let them come to things in their own terms, in their own time. And I think artists are in that way no different from the rest of us. It's been a very tough time. And a lot of artists have seen their income disappear, paltry as it was to start with in many cases. I was very pleased that we were able to keep our artist educator team in place, thanks to JobSeeker. I think it's been a very difficult time.
And what will be the implications if JobSeeker isn't continued?
In my case, a $5 million deficit next year. Yeah, look, it's very serious for all of us. Our problem, I can just explain very quickly, is that we are very dependent on our venues. So that's our business. It's 40% of our income. So weddings, corporate launches, etc. All the things you can't do now. So we're a bit like the performing arts. They can't open. They can't have people in theatres. So we're all really struggling right now. We're fine for the moment because we actually have we have reserves, unlike some companies. I have a very cautious board, and I'm Scottish, and I inherited a bankrupt institution. So we managed our money really carefully, but it's not going to last long when we're 40% down on income. So everybody's in that position at the moment. And there have been announcements by both the state and federal government. It hasn't translated into anything yet. So that's the key issue for us right now.
The particular groups, you mentioned your Indigenous artists, and there are any other groups of artists. How have particular groups fared? Starting, for example, with Western Sydney, you mentioned some bright spots, but I assume there are some dark spots as well. The Indigenous communities, how far out do you reach?
Well, funnily enough, we've just
into remote communities.
Yeah, good question. We've just been in touch with Macgregor up in Arnhem Land because we're doing a very big project, which is now being pushed out by another year. So just before the closure, we were due to bring a group of women down because we have an amazing collection of weavings from Macgregor, and we want to find out who they're all by, because museums sometimes have these amazing objects from Indigenous communities and they actually don't know who the artists are, which is really bad. So we've embarked on this incredible project to speak to the women from Macgregor who know who these things are by. And we hold that collection, incidentally. We don't own it. We hold it on behalf of the community of Macgregor. It's a very interesting situation. Now, of course, that's all stopped. But my colleague Clotilda today, one of our Indigenous curators, tells me that we are talking again to Macgregor and we're starting to plan to bring them down here. For those Indigenous communities, the lockdown was good. It happened quickly. There were, no visitors allowed in, and they've been pretty much unscathed, actually. And the last thing we want to do is bring them down to Sydney, something terrible, like to take the virus back. So I think, funnily enough, again, they're already communities in isolation, so they're in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
But just in answer to Western Sydney, well, of course, I know from the teachers that we're working with, they all want to get excursions going again. They're appreciating the online, but they really want to come back into the museum. So we've cautiously started. We have a wonderful show opening in October by the amazing Chinese-Australian artist Lindy Lee, which I'm curating. They do let me do a bit of art stuff now and again. And I know that show is really going to resonate because she's an extraordinary artist who talks about what it's like to be Chinese Australian today in her work in a beautiful way. And she's a Buddhist, talking about our relationship to the cosmos. I mean, lots of big ideas and lots of very practical things. I know that show will resonate so hugely with so many young people from around Australia, but particularly from Sydney. And I know we're just really wanting to get the opportunity to bring people back in. And I think we can manage with groups. We're actually quite good at it now. We've had, 5,000 people through last week. We know how to manage the distancing, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm quite confident we will be able to offer those opportunities again quite soon.
Wonderful. We have a question from Tona Stevenson, who's from the Powerhouse Museum, who's congratulating you on your leadership of the MCA, as do we all. Her question is, given that the Powerhouse, of course, is topical, will there be opportunities for the MCA to collaborate with the Powerhouse Museum branch in Parramatta?
Absolutely.
A bit of the Dorothy Dixon, I'm sure.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm on the record as a supporter. I might as well admit it again, though it does get me in a bit of trouble. I think that what Lisa Havilah is planning in Parramatta is extraordinary, and how fabulous that we end up with two. We keep one, and if we'd gone out and suggested that in the first place, that would never have happened. So I think the Powerhouse is an amazing organisation. In fact, your contemporary curator used to work here. And that, again, that intersection between art, design, science, which is so much at the heart of what the Powerhouse is about, and also what the Powerhouse is going to do in future, is very exciting. And I very much hope, yes, indeed, that we will work together. I keep saying collaboration is key, is one of our values.
Great. Okay. Stuart, I've run out of questions.
Well, then in that case, you may wish to bring the Q&A to a close.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for answering those questions so openly, and I will now hand back to Stuart.
It's a great pleasure to do so. Lizanne, first of all, a broad general thank you, which is most important. I think you've helped us individually very much with the conversations we're all having. We're talking about the experience we're going through. We're trying to make sense of it and to see how it's going to influence, or how we want it to influence, our lives and our society. And you've given us tremendous talking points and a deeper insight into ourselves and our society and how we've all responded. So broadly, that's what my thank you is about. But there are quite a few points that I just feel really need to be addressed. And so I was madly scribbling, and I hope I can read it now. First of all, I really appreciated you pointing out how art close to home, right here in Sydney, counts every bit as much as art in New York or London. I think we have to keep remembering that and valuing art here as much as we do overseas, and especially right now when we can luxuriate in it and we can't go anywhere else. That is not a second choice. It's just an opportunity to really take advantage of that. So thank you for reminding us of that too. And that was in about the first sentence. So we're going to have to skip ahead. One of the things about contemporary art, and that I think you've helped us most to deal with, is the fact that so many people are flummoxed by what is contemporary art, what is the value of it, why bother, look at that. And it's much easier not to tackle that challenge. So you've helped us to defend it and to understand why we want to defend contemporary art. So thank you for helping us to do that. And I'm going to say a few ways in which I think you did. Primarily, you did not talk about the price tag on art to talk about its value. You found its value in the doing of art, in the production of art, in the constructiveness of art. You made it a practical activity, and you showed us the many different areas of life in which art has come to our assistance in personal crises, and certainly in these big social crises we've had. You showed us the direct impact on people's lives. And I think we discovered for ourselves that it's in crises that we actually make the art. We saw a lot of that being reported, and you've helped us to understand why we do it. You identified for us very clearly how contemporary art, our art today, the things that we are doing, is the essential key to our response to this great series of crises. Bushfires, or first drought. We take off our mind off drought by having bushfires, and we take our mind off bushfires by having a pandemic, a kind of crisis that we've never had before, that we've shared with the entire world. How do we make sense of that? And what can we do to rescue ourselves from this situation? And you've shown us how through art we can find strength, we can build relationships, we can enable ourselves to help us through the mental health challenges, and to deal with emotions that have to be dealt with for us to maintain our humanity and our relationships between individuals and communities. So it's with the arts that we must go forward, and we must have an arts-led recovery or no recovery at all. Thank you very, very much for helping us to think about that, to understand it, and to know that there is so much we can do, including encouraging our government to ensure that it is an arts-led recovery. Thank you very, very much, Liz Ann, and I hope you can hear the applause resounding.
I
Thank you.
look forward to seeing you all here.
You certainly will. And there are some activities coming soon, which are going, Royal Society activities, which are going to be highlighted on the screen when I say goodbye to you, so that you can, with your pencil and paper, take down the notes about coming events in the Royal Society. Those of you who missed the loop of slides at the beginning will not have seen that. Before we go to that loop of slides, I do just want to also thank the many people who have contributed 199th birthday presents to the Royal Society. And that opportunity is available until the end of this month through our website. But what is happening is your generosity is enabling us to produce programs like this one tonight, to capture these marvelous speeches and discussions, questions and answers, everything, for posterity, and for the Library and Archive of the Royal Society. So thank you from all of us, including posterity, to those of you who have been making presents, and those of you who haven't quite gotten around to it yet, you still can, and it will still be tax deductible in the next tax year. A final thank you to you, Elizabeth Ann Macgregor, Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art. We got from you exactly what we expected, an artful discussion of really important topics that reach right to the heart of humanity. Thank you very much, Elizabeth Ann Macgregor, Susan Pond, Ian Sloan, and all of our audience for making this a wonderful evening. And good night.